So this is this is what I was thinking we would do together for the next few weeks. Look at some of the Sunday school, vacation, Bible school stories that we learned as kids. But what we were taught as kids, and they were kids' lessons. And so I thought it would be fun to relook at all of the big five or big six, Noah's Ark and all the big ones that we learned when we were 5, 6, 7, 8, but approach them from a grown-up perspective to see what God is teaching us in that. You willing to do that with me? So we started with Zacchaeus last week. He was a wee little man. And we learned that, but what did we take away when we were 6 about Zacchaeus and the sycamore tree? I mean, I didn't learn that lesson until I was much older, but I was enthralled with the idea of climbing trees. I thought that was pretty cool. So if I'd have been hearing that story when I was 8, I would have been caught up in the climbing tree part of it. And can you really find God by climbing trees? That's pretty cool. So today we're going to look at, you guys, the big ones. We're going to look at the big ones, like Noah's Ark. So when you were little, I remember Noah's Ark as a kid and reading it to my children. And even when I started reading it to my kids, I really wasn't mature in my faith. I really had no concept of this stuff. So all I remember, if you'd asked me a few years ago, what I would have remembered, 2 giraffes sticking out over the edge of the boat, 2 elephant trunks on one end, and maybe a bunny. And it's this happy rainbow story with animals. Has more to do with a zoo than it has to do with the destruction of the earth and repentance and condemnation. So today we're going to look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That was one of the big ones. That was one of the big ones we learned at Bible school. And so you guys, I'm going to look over here all morning because I see Sunday school teachers and one of our graduates and some of our youth to see you guys can help me teach this today. Okay, do you guys know who that is? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Yes? Say amen, youth. Okay, all right. Starts in the book of Daniel. We're going to start with, I need to turn off one of these speakers up here, I think. We're going to start with chapter 1 of Daniel, which is right here. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. So Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar II, who was the first big king, and he had a building campaign, and he was great, and everybody's heard his name, Nebuchadnezzar. And he was, at that time, at least in that area, he was the ruler of all things, Babylon. And 3 times Jerusalem was besieged or conquered, taken over. And in this particular time, the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and the literature of the Chaldeans. So when you're little and you're 5, you're telling this story to the kindergarten kids or to Vacation Bible School, and it's a good story because these young men were so brave, even though they were told to bow down to somebody else, to a statue, God saved them from the fiery furnace. As you grow up and you learn, you realize as you're 12 years old or 13 years old or 11 years old, this is really a story of your country getting conquered, your family being killed, run off the throne. You were sitting in a palace. You were noble. You were in aristocracy. You lived a life of the 1%. You had it all going for you, and you had all this, and you're smart, and you're good looking, and you're strong, and you're healthy, and you think the world is at your feet. And boy, when I grow up, I'm going to be this, and when I grow up, I might be king, and when I grow up, I'm going to be a ruler. And you just put all of that on hold, and then all of that crashes down. City is under attack. Your family is either killed or taken away, and now you're a slave. We don't teach that to 5- and 6-year-olds. But that's the story of what's going on. So now these 12, 13-year-olds who had everything going for them, who sat on top of the world, are carried off in chains from Jerusalem, their home, with no idea what's going to happen next. The world has just collapsed. It's just fallen apart. There's everything we put our hope and trust in is gone. And they're carried off to a foreign god, a foreign king, foreign land, soldiers, mean people, bad things. This is fun, right? But as grown-ups now, you guys are ready to hear the truth. This is a hard story. This is a hard story. And the story goes on. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of their time they might serve before the king. So this is their formidable years. They're 11 through 15, 12 through 15, 16 years, and now they're learning a new language, new rules, they're learning new gods, they're learning all these new things. They're treated very well, but they live in a condition where at any moment their lives are worthless. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them, the chief of the eunuchs gave new names. He gave Daniel the name of Belshazzar, to Hananiah the name Shadrach, to Mishael the name Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. This is where they came from. Where did the 3 young men in the fire furnace come from? They got captured, put into slavery, hauled across the Middle East, put in the castle, trained and taught the new ways, a new way of life, a new God, a new rule, and given new names. And now we pick up at chapter 3. There's more going on here, but I wanted to pick up at chapter 3 from there. And so we've got these, he's king of Babylon. He's got all these different regions. He's got rulers over everything. They didn't live in that same house or palace with Nebuchadnezzar, but they were put in a place where he was in rule in a very nice palace and raised. And sometime during his reign, Nebuchadnezzar decided, I am all that, actually. It's about time people showed me a little more respect with all the things I got going on. And he was famous for his building. He built buildings and walls and all of this stuff. In fact, as we're going to find out in a minute, there is a lot of archaeological evidence of his brick building prowess, because at one point he was building or making, his kingdom was making 1 million, somewhere between 1 million, 3 million bricks at a time to underscore his building program. And we know that because we've found hundreds and hundreds of bricks left over from that period with his name stamped on them. And why is that important? Because how do you make bricks? You fire them in a furnace. So he had at different places throughout his empire these huge furnaces, which were half underground and a roof over top, mostly earthen. And down, you take a couple steps to go down in, like I would be right here. And down in there would be trays and trays where the bricks would sit on, and stones that bricks would sit on. And they'd take them in as mud, and they'd go back outside. They'd stoke the furnace. They'd fire it up. And some had coverings and some didn't, depending on the hole. And that's where you get the fiery furnace. So Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits, about 90 feet or so, 6 cubits wide, about 9, 10, 11 feet wide. And he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, and all of those people you can read, and all of the important people to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. This is part of the story. He made a statue, a great big statue of himself, gold, set it up in the middle of the square, and called everybody in every government and every leader everywhere to come to bow down before it. So he called them back together and had set it up, and they stood before the image that he had made. Then a herald cried out, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, O nations, O languages." So this is people from everywhere he'd conquered. He wasn't in the habit of destroying every city he conquered. He tried to keep as much going. Most of the cities and the regions and the villages surrendered to him because of his reputation. So they didn't have to die, but they had to pay allegiance to the king. You are now mine. And what you have is mine if I want it. And you will serve me. And he got it in the middle of his, he reigned for 50 years or so. But somewhere in the middle of that, he felt like he needed to take it up a step. I'm going to build a statue, and just to prove your loyalty, I'm going to have everybody bow down before my statue. And it is when you hear the band playing that you will fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So at that time, when all the people heard the band playing, those instruments, and the nations and languages fell down and they worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. And they spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the band, with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." Then there were certain Jews, whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. I was looking over some of the lessons and kind of skimming through what people are teaching to kindergartners and to Vacation Bible School kids about this thing. And what is the takeaway from this story? And I saw that for some lessons, the takeaway was about bullying. Because these mean tattletales came running and said, they're not doing what you said, they're not doing what you did, and they turned them in. And the takeaway for these kids was an anti-bullying message. And I thought there's really so much more to this message than bullying. And then one of them was, this is about pride. This whole story is about pride. The king had so much pride that God had to teach him a lesson. Yeah, that's in there too, but that's pretty shallow and superficial. And one of it was about peer pressure. They said this lesson is about peer pressure. How to teach peer pressure to your youth group is through this story. Because everybody was bowing down, but they didn't want to bow down, but they were pressured to bow down. And that's still, that's kind of taking this very serious, dramatic story of faith and subjugation and fear and courage and making it a social issue, I think, more than anything else. What is our take? Are we as mature believers, grown-up believers supposed to take away from this? Where's the punchline? What's the story? What do we learn? I don't have that answer, sorry. No, I have a couple of ideas, though. And I got to be honest, as I grow up and as the more I read it, I do take away different things each time. I see new stuff in it. And one of them is, and we'll see at the end, but one of them is, God can use anybody sitting in that chair. He wanted to use Jehoiakim, king of Judah, to be an example for the world. He wanted to use the Israelites, starting with King David or Abraham before him. You are going to be my people. This is how the world is going to. He wanted to use them, but they kept failing and they kept falling. But that doesn't ever stop God. He can use Pharaoh. He can use Nebuchadnezzar. And he will accomplish his purposes. As we read later in Isaiah 45, God called Cyrus, which is going to be the successor, the next big king of Persia, and the first great king Persia. God said, he is my anointed one, and through him I will accomplish all of my will. It doesn't, if you can permit me, it doesn't matter who's in the Oval Office. I always say elections matter, but what matters more is God. God never gets off his throne and lets someone else take over. It doesn't matter who's in the Oval Office. It doesn't matter who's sitting in Moscow or who's in the governor's seat or who's in the mayor's seat. God's will is to make himself famous and to draw people to him. And if he needs to use those who don't believe in him, he will. In fact, he will even use me or you or Cecil in the grocery store. God is actively looking to draw people to him, and if we won't be the vessel, he will use his own enemies to accomplish his will. That puts less worry and anxiety on me when I turn on the news thinking, oh my gosh, how are we going to get out of this? God can use anyone. And he will, and he does. So that's one of the stories that I'm taking away from this. Do my part, and don't think that God can't do his. So then Nebuchadnezzar, in a rage and fury, gave a command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Now the king liked them. He was training them. They were his prodigies. He's putting them in some position. So he didn't want to just take their word for it. He's giving them one more chance. He's mad, but he's given them one more chance. And he said, is this true, you three, that you will not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the time you hear the band, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, it's all going to be good. This is your chance. But mark my words, if you don't, you shall be cast into the fiery furnace immediately. And who is the God who can deliver you from that? This is a grown-up story, isn't it? Who's the God that can get you out of this mess? There's a lesson for us grown-ups. We might not face fiery furnace, but man, sometimes life is hard. Sometimes the choices before us almost demand a compromise. If that is the case, so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said, O king, we have no need to answer you in this matter. In other words, you don't need to give us another trial. Our mind is made up. It doesn't matter. Go ahead, give us 2 chances. Give us 3 chances. I'm going to tell you now, O king, we're not changing our minds. Our faith is set. Our minds are made up. If that's the case, and you throw us in the fiery furnace, our God, whom we serve, is able. Our God, whom we serve, is able. If you got a Bible, if you're reading, that's where you highlight it, that's where you underline it. Your God is able. We're talking about faith and courage here. We talked about in our classes, we're talking about spiritual gifts this week. One of the spiritual gifts is the gift of faith. But we all have faith. We have faith to believe in God. We have faith that he can do things. But this is going to take if you'll agree with me, another measure of faith. I mean, I believe in God and I trust him, and he's proved himself over and over in my life. But if someone came in this room right now and grabbed me and pushed me up against the wall with a machine gun in my face, I'm going to need a little more faith in that moment. I'm going to need a boost. I like to think I can do it, but I'm going to need a boost. I'm going to need an infusion of supernatural faith to do that. And these guys had it. They had it. And they didn't have a Bible to teach them all this stuff. They had the 10 Commandments and a few other things. They had the Torah by this point, but that's what they had to go by. They didn't have Paul's story, or they didn't have the story of the Christ coming. They just, and they know in the Bible, in the 10 Commandments, number 3, thou shalt have no other God before me. That's a big one. And the next one says, and thou shalt not create a carven or wooden or a clay image and bow down and worship it. You shall not do this. And they say, you know what? All these rules about eating this and eating that, that's subjective. We'll give it a chance. All these other rules, but this is a big one. O King Nebuchadnezzar, you can't make us worship a false god. God has said himself, do not do it. We cannot break that rule. It's one that we cannot break. And he says, he will deliver us from the fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O King. God will get us through. I mean, there are times, Alex is going through one right now. Where does the faith come from to sit at the bedside of your loved one and know it's going to be okay? And just know God will and God is able. That takes a faith that only God can give. Some of our fiery furnaces look like we lose our job, and now what am I going to do? And she just left me, and now what am I going to do? And my children are sick, and now what am I going to do? God that we worship is able. That's the lesson I take from Meshach and Abednego. I worship my God. I believe his word is true. And I know he's able. When it looks like everything is bad, I believe he's able. So next, but if not, let it be known to you, O King, that we do not serve your gods. Our help comes from no one else or nowhere else. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed toward them. And he spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace up 7 times more than it usually is heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. So they're standing there, and the next verse says something for, and I think it's there for a really good reason. And these men were bound in their coats and their trousers and their turbans and their other garments and were cast into the midst of the fire. So they remind us that they're fully dressed, and not just fully dressed, but now we have this image of all of this linen and cotton all over them, which just builds this image of if they get close to that fire, they're going up. You know how you guys have been around bonfires, and once you put the new log and it gets up, I mean, you have to sit back just on a little bonfire. And this is a furnace blazing so hot. And then now we have this image that they've got all of this frilly garments on. So you just know that, I mean, they get close and whoosh, they're basically a torch. They bind up all of the cotton and linen around them and put them in the furnace. So as they approach the furnace, these strong men grab them by the arms. They're bound up. They grab them to the edge of the furnace. And as they get close, the fire is so hot and the smoke is so big that the men die as the boys tumble down the steps into the furnace. That's not your kindergarten story. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. The king Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose up in haste because he had brought a chair. He had sitting in the room, apart from the big furnace room, so that he could see this, and his condemnation was carried out. The punishment was due, and he wanted everybody around him to watch this. And this is what happens to you if you don't obey. So he made a spectacle of it. They brought in a chair so he could sit and watch. And then he was astonished, and he rose in haste out of his chair, saying, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire?" And they answered and said, "Yes, O king, true. That's true. Look," he said, "I see 4 men, and they're loose. And they're walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the form of the 4th looks like the Son of God." How do we know we're going to get through this? How do we know God is sure that he's able? Because he's not far off sitting someplace watching. He's in the fire with us. Most of us, me included, believe this is the pre-baby Jesus, Son of God. So when Jesus says, "I am with you always," he remembers being in the furnace with them. And he means what he says. You're going to go through hard times, but I'm going to be with you. They're going to hate you, and they're going to carry you off, and they're going to throw you into prison for my sake, but lo, I am with you. Do not be afraid. I walked into the fire for my children. I'll walk through the fire with you. Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning furnace and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came up from the midst of the fire. And all of the leaders were amazed. And they saw that these men not only were not bound anymore, but their clothes was perfectly fine. Their hair was not singed, and they didn't even smell like smoke. I love that part. I mean, you can't go to a bonfire and not come home smelling. I mean, the whole house smells like it. You know, the car you ride home, it smells like it. They didn't even smell like smoke. And he said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except for their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of these 3 boys, they shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God. Because there is no other God. Come on. Because there's no other God who can deliver like this. That's our story today. And you can't make up these stories. They said, "Oh, king, here's the thing. I know that you want to do this, but look, in a few hours, you're going to be bound down to my God, so." And as the bullies come around and say, "Look, They're not doing what you told them to do. Look at them. They get in trouble. And they could have said to them, look, sticks and stones might break me bones. In a little bit, I'm going to be your boss. So it's okay. That's what God does to glorify his own name in foreign lands with bad kings. He can do that in your life. He can do that in this nation. He's going to do it in this world. And those who worship him shall be delivered from all of our trials. This is the word of God for the people of God. Father, thank you for your promises, for they are sure and true. Thank you for the stories of faith that encourage us and teach us. And I pray, Lord God, as we leave this place, that you would give us just enough faith to get through the things that face us. For we believe that there is no other God that might deliver us like this. And let the words of my mouth, the words that came from me, be forgotten. But the words that came from you find good soil, that we might be doers and not just hearers.